¿Cómo están? Buenas tardes. Vamos a esperar unos minutos, por favor, a que se conecten el resto de los compañeros. Y a las 7:05 empezamos la lección de hoy. ¿Está bien?
Okay, teacher, good evening.
All right. We're about to begin then. I'm going to ask everyone to turn on your cameras. And yeah, we're just going to continue with our reading sessions. Sweet. We're just going to give another minute for the rest of your classmates to turn on their cameras, and we'll begin today's session. All right, Andres, David, Andrea, and Jasmine, please, if you could turn on your cameras. be awesome. All right, awesome. David, we're just waiting for you. Then we'll begin. All right, so let me welcome everybody to today's session. We're going to continue with the last methodology session for the reading part. Yesterday, for the ones that weren't here, we did our first practice run at the reading section. We did the first 7 questions. We skipped the last 3, which we're going to be doing tomorrow's tomorrow really early in the session. So we're going to finish that exercise, and then I'm going to give you another one. And yeah, we're just basically going to go through all of it in just one go. So what we're going to do today is just we're going to keep on looking at the possible types of questions that we're going to encounter. You're already familiar with some of them because, well, those were the ones available for yesterday's practice. So yeah, today we're going to go over like what the main types are and what are the best strategies to try to tackle them as successfully as we can. All right, before we begin, do we have any questions or do we have any doubts that you want to express before we begin our session? Any comments perhaps on yesterday's reading? Nope. Okay, everybody's clear then. All right, cool. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with the slides. So this is where we, this is where we finished Tuesday's session. So we already looked at the strategies. For the people who weren't here, we basically just went through what the main structure of the reading section is going to be. We went through the 2 main strategies. The first one is reading the passage first, and the second one is going straight for the question. That means once you receive the reading passage, you go straight for the questions and try to answer them and read the text at the same time. Just basically just go looking for the parts that are relevant to the question that we're tackling. So we agreed that this strategy is the most efficient one, especially for the objectives that we have in this not in the course, but the objectives that you all as a group have, because most of you are aiming at the note higher than 90. So yeah, this is the one that's going to allow us more time management, like a better time management, and yeah, basically, if we practice enough, it's going to give us some better results. So yeah, so now we're going to focus on the 10 types of questions that we can encounter. We're not going to see all of them in one passage. Sometimes we're going to have just, I don't know, like more of one kind, and yeah, it's all randomized, but I've ordered them in order of frequency. That means the ones that appear most often are going to be first. For example, vocabulary is the one that you are going to face at least 2, if not 3, as you may have seen in yesterday's practice. I think we had 2 or 3 vocabulary questions. So yeah, and basically the summary and the category ones are the ones that basically have the lowest frequency. Usually, for the summary, you have at least 1 per passage, but sometimes they shift the summary for a category one. So yeah, you have one or the other. You cannot have both of them. So yeah, so now we're going to basically go through all of them. We saw what the vocabulary question was about. Basically, they ask you for a synonym that matches the definition and the context in which the word or the phrase that they're giving you basically relates to the text, and you have to look for the best synonym, right? So this one is the most frequent question that you're going to face. Basically, you're going to encounter anywhere between 2 to 5 of these questions for each passage. It means that it could be the case that in one reading passage you encounter half of your questions to be vocabulary questions. So basically, one of the keys to tackling these kinds of questions, basically just try to look at a word that is a synonym and make sense within the context. So just try to look for the most similar word in meaning. Some of them are going to make sense in the text, but don't necessarily relate exactly as a synonym to the word that you're asked. So you have to be really, really careful. And that one we encountered some yesterday, and I think these are kind of questions that actually we didn't have many problems with. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. These are the fastest ones. So I recommend that you do these ones first, and then just save more time for the ones that actually take a bit longer to analyze. And yeah, the best way to prepare for these kinds of questions is just to read as much as you can, broaden your vocabulary, and yeah, basically not much. Just basically you improve your vocabulary by reading and just basically encountering new words that you're not familiar with, and just look up the meaning. So we had an example which is based on the text that I shared on the group chat, I think. Did I share the Navajo reading on this? No, it's not the Navajo one. It's, wait, I'm going to send you the reading passage for this one. Just give me a second. Yeah, this is the clonal colonies, right? So I'm going to send it to the chat box in the call, so we can. Where is it? There we go. Yes. So this whole presentation is going to be working with this text. It's about clonal colonies. So all the questions and basically all the examples that we're going to be looking at are based on this reading that I just sent you. If anyone has problems opening the file, or they just cannot see it, please let me know. So yeah, basically it's all going to be related. So basically they ask us what the best the closest word in meaning to associate is in the passage. So who can tell me what the correct answer is? Do we have any volunteers? All right, so
Connect.
Karen. Sorry?
Connect, maybe.
Yep. Precisely, connect is the most related question. Why? Most related option. Why? Because exemplify could make sense in this context, but it's not actually a synonym. Neither is confuse or define. So connect makes sense and also works as a synonym. So it's a pretty straightforward question, right? Any questions? Right. Awesome. So we're going to continue. And yeah, of course, the correct answer is connect. The next kind of questions that you can encounter are the detailed questions. So basically, as its name says, these questions ask you for a specific detail within the text. They give you a piece of text, or they ask you about a certain detail, and they ask you to look inside the text for the context. Basically, it's really similar to the previous one. So this one is also really high frequency. You can encounter between 2 to 4 per passage. It's not as common as the vocabulary, it's slightly less common, but yeah, you're going to encounter at least 2 of these questions in the test. So yeah, basically the information that you're looking for in this kind of question is usually between 1 or 2 sentences. You don't have to look for the whole paragraph, so you just look for the keywords and look for the 1 or the 2 sentences that are actually related to what the question is asking you. Yeah, so basically the key to answering these kinds of questions are basically looking for the keyword. Just identify what the keyword is and look it up in the part of the text mentioned. And then basically just when you encounter the keyword, as we're going to see in the example, you can encounter it multiple times, like at least 2. Just try to figure out as fast as you can which one is the relevant part of the text, because one of them could mention the keyword, but it's not actually referring to it in the same context as the question is. So you have to be careful with that one. So yeah, this is the example that we're going to be working with. So usually the detailed questions are usually structured this way. According to the second paragraph, what is true of sexual reproduction in clonal plants? All right, so I need a volunteer, please. Who wants to help me with this question? All right, I'm going to need you to volunteer because I don't want to be calling each one of you by name. Just like if I were a, I don't know, high school teacher, another high school teacher, we're just practicing. So the more you practice, the better it's going to be. So I'm going to need a volunteer. Who wants to help me with this one? Right, we're still pretty shy then. Andres. Andres Uribe.
Just the chance, tell me.
All right.
Hey,
All right, you're my namesake. My middle name is also Andres. So, all right, what
That's
is the keyword for this question? What's the thing that
sexual reproduction.
Yep, sexual reproduction, right? So we have to look for sexual reproduction in the text. So I've already highlighted the 2 parts where it mentions it. So Andres, which one do you think is the correct answer? All right, so what we have to do is basically just look at the two highlighted sentences, right? So the first one mentions sexual reproduction, but it doesn't have much of a relationship because they talk about what a clonal colony, basically how it grows, and it can happen within a sexual reproductive scheme. So the second one is the one that's actually related. So what does it say about sexually reproduced offsprings?
Yes, teacher is the second one.
Right, so what does it say?
Just
give me a quick summary.
while those species may also reproduce sexually through the production of seeds. Right.
All right, so what's important is not that you actually go, I don't know, like word by word. What is important for the reading section is that you're able to summarize what it says, right? So you have to just basically look at it as fast as you can and just basically form an idea of what it's about. Because that means that you're going to basically take less time analyzing a question or analyzing a passage. And that way you're just going to be able to extract the exact piece of information that we are asking. So basically, this sentence refers to how the clonal colonies can reproduce sexually, but basically the offsprings are the equivalent of sons and daughters of plants. Basically, yeah, it's basically the sons of the plants. They call it offspring. The offspring are not part of the colony because they're not genetically identical to the plants that actually produce the seeds, right? So that's the important piece of information. So which one would be the correct answer then? All right, who can give me the answer? Rodrigo.
I guess is the option 2, because it says the words that it's not genetically identical.
Yep. Okay. So that's actually a good guess because, well, let's look at the options. The first one basically says that it inhibits the spread of new stems. Doesn't mention anything about it, so we're just going to discard it. The second one says that without seeds, plants in a colony cannot be considered genetically identical. So it mentions seeds, which are the main way of sexual reproduction between plants. But and it mentions the genetically identical part. The context is a bit wonky because it says without seeds, and doesn't necessarily says the same. That doesn't necessarily say the same thing in the passage. It says that they can actually reproduce with seeds, but you don't consider those offspring from seeds to be part of the colony, right? So this one is actually not correct because it changes the meaning of the passage. Basically, what it says here is that if they don't have seeds, then they're not considered genetically identical, and that's not true. And the fourth one is also possible. It's unlikely that the plant created will be a clone. Here, it doesn't mention that there's a possibility for the resulting offspring to be a clone, right? It just straight up says that it's not part of the colony. So the only possible answer is option number 3, because basically says the resulting because the resulting plants are not created through cloning, basically, which is vegetative reproduction, they are excluded from the colony, and that's what it says here. They are not considered part of the colony because they're not genetically identical, because they reproduce sexually. They didn't reproduce through cloning, right? So you have to be really careful, because in the second option, even though it mentioned the main keywords, it basically changed the meaning. So you have to be careful reading the options. Any questions? Okay, cool. So, as I said, there could be some tricky questions within this example. For example, this one is actually really tricky because it says what is shared by the colonies by the clones within a colony. So what does within mean? Tell me what within means. Within means inside, right? Related to, like intrinsically related to. So basically, what do the clones that are part of the colony have in common? So if we go to, I didn't put the paragraph here, but if you go to your lecture and you look through the second paragraph, which is here, basically in this part, yeah, in the first sentence, it says that they're grown in a given location and originate, and wait, I'm just going to move this, and all originating vegetatively, not sexually. So that means that all the ones that originate vegetatively are clones. They come from a single ancestor, right? So what's the right answer? You can tell me. A, B, C, or D? or 1, 2, 3, or 4? All right, Karen Arteaga.
D, teacher.
Yep. It's D because it mentions actually that within the colony, they share a common progenitor. But the thing is that if you look at the same passage, it mentions that there's a sexual reproduction of seeds and they originate an offspring. So that's the same thing as in the previous example. It mentions the same keywords. So it could be misleading in that case. So you have to be really careful of the context in which you're reading the question. So here the important part is that they're asking what's shared between all the members of the colony. Okay. Cool. Do we have any?
So, teacher, here we can say that the only technique is to see the keyword.
Yes, you have to look for the keyword and understand the context. Be really careful for what the question is asking you. And just basically make sure that it makes sense. Like for example, in this one, without seeds, for example, it changes the meaning. It has the same keywords, but it changes the meaning of the sentence. So you have to be really careful. It doesn't change the meaning or just basically shifts it. Because they usually do that. They put a question like this, which it has the same keywords, but they just basically flip the meaning. So they just mean something completely different. So you have to be really careful with those ones. Is that okay?
Yeah, teacher.
Sweet. So the next kind of question is the except questions. These are really similar to the previous ones, but as we say that they're similar, they're completely identical, except they ask for the opposite, right? So basically they're going to give you 4 different options and they're going to basically all of them give you pieces of information that are found inside the text. And you have to find out which one is not actually mentioned, right? So instead of finding the ones that's actually mentioned, like the previous one, like the detailed one, you have to look for the ones that is not actually mentioned. The way to identify this kind of question is they're always going to use the word except or not. Whenever you see except or not, just know that it's an except question. So usually you're going to find between 1 or 2 of these kinds of questions within the text. So it's a medium to high frequency question. So the key to answering this question is basically identifying that they're asking for the exception by recognizing the word except or not, and basically using a process of elimination. This one takes a lot of time. So yeah, just basically try to do the faster ones first and then go for this one, because this one actually requires you to eliminate options. All right, so this is an example of this kinds of question. They say, according to the passage, all of the following are true of clonal colonies, except, here I highlighted the word except to show you how it's going to be worded. And then they give you the options. They are sometimes thought of as a single organism. They are not always easy to recognize. They rarely reproduce sexually. The clones may be physically connected. Now here you have to be careful, because here it says according to the passage. That means that you have to read through the whole thing to basically identify which part is it. It's not asking you about a certain paragraph. So they could ask you about the whole passage. So here I put some of the paragraphs that are actually related, so we can just basically go through them. So in this one, I'm not going to ask you to answer, because it's going to take quite a lot of time. That's why I told you these ones are usually reserved to the middle, to the last part of the resolution, because they take time. Right, so they are sometimes thought of as a single organism. If we look here, right, so in the last sentence, it says that they're considered part of a single organism, right? If they're connected to a common rhizome. So the first one is true. It is found within the text. So if we go to paragraph 6, basically, because of clonal colonies are often connected underground, it can be difficult at times to identify whether a group of stocks are in fact just one colony. So the second one, the one that says that they're not always easy to recognize, is found within the passage. So that's one that's not the correct answer. In comparison, plants frequently reproduce asexually, creating genetically identical offspring or clones. And for this type of population is vegetative reproduction, which includes a number of different processes. So they say that they can reproduce sexually, but once they reproduce sexually, they're not considered part of the colony. So this is a really good candidate for the correct answer, and that the clones may be physically connected. Clonal colony is a group of genetically identical individuals that have grown in a given location, not sexually. So this is the main thing that actually gives us the answer. So they say here that they are connected underground, and it can be difficult at times to identify it. And that makes option D mentioned in the text. So the only one that is actually mentioned saying that they're not sexually reproduced is option C. So that's why option C is the correct answer, because it's the only one that is not true about clonal colonies. Do we have any questions regarding these kinds of answers? So if you can see, it actually takes a lot of time because you have to identify which parts of the text actually mention these details. So that's why it takes a lot of time. So you just basically identify within the option what are the keywords and look for them in the text. Just basically skim through it and just try to find where you can find this evidence. Any questions?
Teacher, I have a question. In the TOEFL exam, we can skip, for example, this type of question and pass to the next and then back?
Yeah. So within one passage, that means the 10 questions that are comprehended within one passage, you can actually do them in the order that you feel better. You don't have to do it first the first one, then the second one, then the third one. So you can choose the order. So that's why I always recommend that you do the vocabulary ones first, then the detailed ones, and then the other shorter ones, and then save these ones and the last two for last, because basically you're just basically going to eliminate the faster ones and then go through these ones that actually take a bit more of time. So yeah, you can choose the order if it's within the same passage. Once you go to the next passage, you cannot modify your answers anymore.
Thank you.
All good.
Teacher, sorry, maybe it's a technical question, but in the TOEFL we have, I know that we have two buttons, that is next and back, but is there any specific option that we can see all the questions because press next if are 42 questions, yeah, it takes time also.
So for each passage, you're just going to have 10 questions.
Okay.
So you can go through all 10 of them for each passage, and then you can identify which one is which, and then you can basically start solving them. But you cannot see them all at once.
Okay, thank you.
Sweet.
Hey teacher, just a question too. How many passages are we gonna have? Do you know, or I mean, how many passages does the whole reading section have?
Between 3 to 4.
3 to
Basically,
4.
they're going to give you between like 50 to 72 minutes, depending on how many passages they give you. So that gives you an average of 18 minutes per passage. So that means 1 minute and 45 seconds, give or take, for each question on average. But if you see, for example, the vocabulary ones usually take you between 20 to 30 seconds tops. So you can just basically go through all of this. That way you can give more time to the other longer ones. So yeah, on average, you have like 1 minute and 45 seconds tops for each question.
All right, and you said that each passages has 10 questions, right?
Yep.
So it'll be
Oh.
like 40 questions in total for
Between
50
30
to
to
70
40.
minutes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
All good. But they're going to be grouped in groups of 10, always groups of 10. So just analyze 10 at a time. All right, sweet. So we're going to basically what a good technique for the accept question is just basically see which ones are the most extreme options, because those are usually, not always, but usually the ones that are incorrect. The ones that go with all or none, like always, never, none, all, like all the options that say like something that's really extreme, like absolutely, completely, unquestionably, some really strong opinions or generalizations, or using superlatives like the most, the biggest, the greatest. So those options are a good guess to select as a candidate for the correct answer in the accept category, but they're not always the case, as we're going to see in this option. For example, it says, according to paragraph 3, all of the following are features of rhizomes, except that they extend underground. So which one here is the most extreme? It's option number 3, right? Because they say it appears in all colonial colonies, right? So this one is the most extreme. But if we actually read through the text, basically it says here, so it's called a rhizome. So we identify the keyword, so it's a rhizome, right? So rhizome is mentioned here. A root capable of doing this. So what does it refer to this? To opening, breakthrough and to open air, right? So that's called a rhizome, basically something that protrudes to the air. So it says here that a root is capable of doing this. It doesn't say that it happens all the time. It mentions that it happens. It mentions that it's that is a feature, but it doesn't say that this happens all the time. So basically, that's why this one is our correct answer, because even though it mentions it, because it's a really extreme answer, that's a correct answer. This works most of the time, not all the time. So just be careful of that. But when you see a really strong opinion or something really extreme, that's a good indication that this could be the right answer. Okay, just as I highlighted here, it says in many cases. So basically that in many cases gives you that it's common, but it doesn't happen all the time. Okay. Any questions? All right, cool. So the next kind of question is also a medium frequency one. You're going to encounter between 1 or 2 per passage. So this is an inference question. So as the name implies, basically they're going to ask you for an inference, to infer something. Basically, you're given certain information and you are expected to arrive to a conclusion, right? But as it says here, it's really similar to the detailed questions, but they ask you to answer a question, right? So with the information provided, you have to come to a conclusion. So the correct answer is not actually within the text, but it's implied in the text. These ones are really, really tricky because they ask you for your interpretation. So you have to be really efficient at skimming what it says. And as it says here, basically read between the lines. You know what read between the lines mean? Basically understand what the author is trying to imply, like what is the meaning behind what is actually said. And just try to look for those implications, even though they're small and sometimes hard to find. Just try to look for what the author meant, right? What is the implication that the author gave? So these ones are quite tricky. So an example of these questions, and one way to identify an inference questions is that they always use a variation of the word infer. For example, here it says what can be inferred from the first 3 paragraphs. So it's using the past tense of the word infer. What can be inferred, sorry, from the first 3 paragraphs. So they give you quite a lot of text to basically to look for the answers. And yeah, they give you some options. For example, it says they cannot exist in plants with smaller root systems. So you have to check whether they mention at some point whether the size of the root systems actually affect the clonal colonies. It says plants will only begin vegetative reproduction when sexual reproduction is not an option. They mention that sometimes they do it, but as I remember, they don't actually mention that it's the only, like that there's a causal relationship, right? One doesn't cause the other, basically. There is more than one method of cloning which can be used. Okay, this one actually looks like a good candidate. And the presence of plants grown from seeds can stop a colony from forming. So if you read the 3 first paragraphs, which you're going to have a good idea because all the previous questions refer to the first 3 paragraphs. So you already have a big idea what the text is about. You don't have the whole context because you haven't read all 6 of them, but you know what they mean. So that's why in this case I would be more inclined to choose C, because as we saw in the previous exam, in the previous question, clonal reproduction is actually can take different forms. So yeah, basically you just go analyzing and just go look for this implications. So does it mention anything regarding the size of the roots? Not really. It doesn't mention anything about the size. Do they mention that it's either vegetative or sexual when one is not available without the other? So that's not the question. If they don't mention it explicitly, then it's not the correct answer. And the 4th one is that they stop a colony for forming. They mentioned that the offspring is not considered part of the colony, but they don't mention that they stop the cloning process when an offspring from sexual reproduction occurs, right? So the only one that's actually feasible is this one, that there's more than one method. They don't mention which other methods appear, but they say that in most cases and that it is a possibility. Okay? Do we have any questions? Yeah. As I told you, this one is really tricky because, well, they're asking us to review quite a lot of text and just basically make an assumption, right? All right. So I put here the 3 paragraphs, which you can review. You also have the reading, so you just go through them. And yeah, I already sent you the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to send it again at the end of the class, so you can actually go through them and just basically revise them with more time. All right, so one tricky thing is that you have to remember at all times that this is not a test about knowledge of how much you know about a certain subject. Usually you're not going to know anything about the subject, or you may have some previous knowledge, but this previous knowledge is not going to help you during the test, because all the information about needed and all the information important to solving the test is going to be within the reading. So actually knowing anything beforehand doesn't really help you. It could actually work against you, because you're just going to be mixing some other theories that you may have from previous knowledge. So just concentrate on what the information provided in the passage is about. So this is not a knowledge test. It's about communicating the language. So for example, here, it can be inferred from paragraph 4 that individual ramets removed from colonies grow new rhizomes, are not counted as part of the larger organism, are at risk of decreased nourishment, or grow more slowly than ramets that remain attached. So the first one and the last one actually could be implication that if you know a bit more about plant biology, could be implications that you could make, right? They sound pretty plausible, but they're not actually mentioned within the text. So neither is option C. So basically, the only one that's actually mentioned in the text is option B. If you read through it, you're going to read that once sometimes root systems can get separated and they form a different ramet, which is the root part that can have a rhizome that goes outside the soil. And once its separation is completed, both parts can actually survive if the conditions are good. But that separated ramet is no longer considered part of the colony because it's physically separated. So that's why that's the only one mentioned in the text. So you have to be really careful that the information is actually mentioned in the text. Okay. Okay, cool. Questions before we move to the purpose questions. I'm going quite fast because as I told you before, this one is the one that has more options. So we have to review 10 different kinds of questions. So we're just basically, I'm explaining you what my thought process is when I tackle these kind of questions. But yeah, maybe unfortunately, we have only 1 hour, so I cannot really go into much detail, but I'm giving you as much detail as I can. Okay, so for the purpose questions, basically, they ask you what the purpose of a certain word or phrase is. In other words, what its function is. That's why it's either called a purpose or a function question. Basically, they ask you, how is this phrase or is this word used in the text? These ones are also quite medium frequency. You can find between 1 or 2 per passage. And here you have to basically connect it to the big picture. Basically, you have the bigger scheme of things. So basically, you have to learn how to connect this question to this bigger picture, right? How does it connect to the context, basically? This is how these questions are usually worded. Why does the author mention modern scientific advances in the first paragraph? So I've highlighted the modern scientific advances. And yeah, basically they give you the options to avoid the possible confusion, to correct a common misconception, to relate a botanical term to an idea from another field of study, to explain the history of an important word. Here, the important thing is that it could be the same. It could seem similar to the vocabulary questions because they ask you for a synonym. But if you actually analyze it, both like all 4 of them actually make sense. But you have to be in this case really conscious of the context. So let's read it. It says, although people commonly associate the word clone with modern scientific advancements, its usage in botany is far removed from those developments. Sorry, this text is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm struggling a bit. So basically, it could be either the first one or the second one, right? even the third one, because they don't explain the history of a word. They say that that it's used also in botany. The third one could also be a good option, but it's not actually how it's used in this sentence. So it could be either to avoid possible confusion or to correct a common misconception. So in this case, it's not correcting anything, because they say that sometimes it's associated with a word with modern scientific advancement. This word cloning is associated with this concept, but it's not actually correcting. It's just basically clearing a possible confusion, right? So it says not to confuse it with what the normal use of the word cloning is. It's just a regular term in botany. So that's why this is the correct answer, because they're not actually correcting it, but they're just basically avoiding possible confusions, right? So you have to be really, really careful of the context in which the phrase is used in the sentence. Questions, doubts, comments?
Teacher, but also with misconception could be possible, right? Because it has the meaning of.
But it's not, because it's actually it's not correcting a mistake, because cloning is also related, and it's correctly related to modern scientific advances. But it's just saying that it's also used in botany, referring to more common occurrences, right? It's not necessarily the cloning of like the sheep. So it's not correcting it because it's not wrong, but it's just clearing a misconception. So that's why it's not correcting a misconception, because the term is actually used in both scenarios. So that's why it's not correct. So you have to be really, really careful. They're really cheeky with these kinds of questions. Right. So the next one is the reference question. So they ask about a certain word or phrase and what it refers to. Basically, it's quite similar to the vocabulary one, but they don't ask you for the definition per se. They ask you for the definition in the context of the text. So this is where the low frequency questions are going to start. So usually you can find between 1 or 0. That means that within a certain passage, you're not necessarily going to find one, but you're going to have at least one per test. So this is a really low frequency question. So the key to answering these kinds of questions is basically find the logical replacement for the text. Just basically replace the word that they're selecting with any of the options and see if it makes sense. And that's the best way of basically answering this kinds of questions. Just replacing it with each of the options and checking whether it makes sense or not. All right. So an example of this is this question here. The phrase "this type of procreation," they're going to highlight it, refers to. So this is another way of identifying it. It usually always uses a variation of the word refer. So this type of procreation. So you have to actually look within the text to what this type of procreation refers to. So if we go back to the previous sentence, which is usually where the answer is. So it says, in comparison, plants frequently reproduce asexually, creating genetically identical offspring or clones. The term for this type of procreation, so it's referring to the type of procreation that is mentioned in the previous sentence. So in this case, it's asexual reproduction. So which one would be the correct answer? Becoming genetically identical? No, because they're not turning genetically identical. So this one doesn't make sense. Reproduction by cloning. This is actually a really good candidate. Birth to a pair of parents. No, because this is actually what sexual reproduction is. So it's actually referring to the opposite, and producing an individual set of genes. Doesn't necessarily refer to that because they're actually just repeating the same sets of genes. So the only possible option is reproduction by cloning, because That's what they're talking about in the previous sentences. So yeah, that's why the correct answer is option B. So you have to be really mindful of what the previous two sentences refer to basically deduce what this type of reproduction, this type of procreation actually refers to. Okay, so yeah, just basically there's a pattern between all of the possible answers on all of the types of questions. Basically, you just have to be careful with the meanings, right? Just be really careful with what each question is asking you to identify. Okay, cool. Now we're going into the paraphrase questions, and these ones are actually really fun. We encountered some of them in yesterday's practice, where they basically give you a piece of text and they ask you to rephrase it or just say it with using different words. You have to be really careful with, again, with what the words mean, and if it doesn't change the actual meaning of the sentence. These are tricky. These are really tricky. So I suggest you do it with more time, and for example, the quicker ones. And they're also really low frequency. They only ask you one, or they could ask you none for each passage. But you're going to encounter at least one in your test. So the keys are being careful, review the options, look at the order of the roles so they don't mix them up. That's usually what they do. It's like, for example, clonal colonies can create ramets. And ramets, for example, in the option can say ramets can create clonal colonies. It makes sense, but they just change the order of the subjects. So just be careful of the order of the roles so they don't give you something that's mixed up. And just always think of the concept, of the context, sorry, and just make sure that the information is correct. Just check the meaning, basically. Check that it doesn't change the meaning. So this is an example. It says, yeah, and this is how these questions are going to be worded, always. So these first two sentences are always how these questions are worded. They're just going to change this part. So which of the sentences below best express essential information in the highlighted section of paragraph 3? Incorrect choices change the meaning in important ways or leave out essential information. Very clear there. It says having one set of roots allows a rhizome and its ramets to act as a unit and exchange nutrients. Because a clonal colony consists entirely of genetic copies, each stem can be considered a duplicate of a sole original. Okay. Due to their shared genes, individuals growing from the same rhizome have a common source of sustenance and are unified as a single organism. This one is a bit wonky because basically they say that they share sustenance, they share food because they have the same genes, and that's not necessarily true. A rhizome and its stems as a whole can be treated as one plant since they have the same genes and collective nourishment. Okay, and let's see what the highlighted passage says. By sharing the same root system, they not only are genetically identical, but also share a nutrient source. In a sense, these plants are a single living thing rather than a cluster of many. So the first one doesn't make much sense because they don't exchange nutrients. They share the same source of nutrients because, and this one is already is discarded. Because a clonal colony consists entirely of genetic copies, each stem can be considered a duplicate of a sole original. No, because here it says that they are considered a single living thing. So it's not a duplicate. It's not just a group of duplicates. So this one is already discarded. We already discarded the third one because it doesn't make sense. So the only possible option is option number 4. Because basically it says the same thing that it says here. A rhizome and stems as a whole can be treated as one plant, as a single living thing. And they have, since they have the same genes, because they're genetically identical, and collective nourishment, share a nutrient source. So it mentions all 3 aspects of the abstract of the passage. And that's why it's the only one that actually conveys the correct information. Any questions? All right, cool. So we're running out of time, but if you don't mind, we're going to extend for another 10 minutes. Right, so the insert text question, basically they ask you to insert a text in a certain part of a paragraph. They're going to give you options, and this question is only going to make sense when it's placed in the correct spot. So this is one question that is always going to be found in your reading sections. You're always going to encounter one, and it's going to be the second to last. So if you look at the, well, it's not always going to be second to last, but usually it's always second to last. In one example I put you, I think for tomorrow's reading practice, it's fourth, I think, but I don't remember too well. So in this one, you have to be careful reviewing the options, look at the order, think of the context, and make sure it completes the information. And this one is crucial. The connecting words are really, really important, because basically pronouns, transition words like because and since, or because of this. So how it's connected usually gives you a good idea of how this this question is placed. So yeah, so it always has this format. So it gives you 4 squares. Just basically say it says where this can be placed. So regardless, this is a connecting word. Even the most conservative guess points to a truly astounding. Even the most conservative guess points to a truly astounding figure. So where does it make sense? Okay. So here, the average age of panda stems 130 years, as indicated by 3 rings. Okay, it mentions 130 years, but doesn't make a guess. So probably not it. The roots are generally estimated. Okay, here's guess to be 80,000 years old. Although some estimates are as high as 1 million. Okay, this is a really good candidate because it makes a guess. As for its record holding weight, the colony is believed to be 6,000 tons in total. Here it also makes a guess because it says it's believed. For reference, the blue whale, the largest animal, weighs approximately 170. So this one and this one are actually really well connected and make sense together. So this is probably not it. And this one, 1,080,000 years, is a really, really big guess. So that here is where probably it will be better placed. And if we see the answer, effectively, here is where it makes sense. Because it's an astounding figure, it's a really big number, and it implies a guess, which is here generally estimated. So that's where this sentence makes sense. Okay, so these are the last 2 kinds of questions. Usually the test finishes with either a summary or a category one. Summaries are way more common than category ones. So basically here they ask you to summarize the main idea of a text. Basically provide a summary. They're going to give you 6 options. Usually 3 of them are correct, 3 are incorrect. So you have to be really careful with this. So the keys to the question is basically you need to see the structure of the text and what the author meant. You have to try not to focus on the less important details, even though they're mentioned. If they're not essential to the text, don't take them into account. Just use the main points and summarize basically what each paragraph is about. This is the important one. Basically, if you look at all 6 paragraphs, just have a rough idea what each paragraph is about. Summarize it. So in this case, for example, this is how it's always going to look. So they give you 3 answer choices, 6 options here, 3 are correct, 3 are not correct. And they always give you the first option. It says a clonal colony is a group of genetically identical plants produced by vegetative reproduction. So this is the main idea of the text. Then you have to select all the ones that make sense. We're going to jump straight for the answer here and basically see these three are mentioned and are main points. One type of colony is formed by the extension of a root that sprout new stems connected below ground to the original. So this is basically what a clonal colony is. So it's a main point. The size and the age of a colony can be extremely impressive, as Pando, a certain colony of quaking aspens, has shown. So we have a whole paragraph referred to this. So it has to be a main point. It's not just a detail, because the whole paragraph is about that. And the last one, statements made about the status of a colony as one organism, however, are difficult to verify. Again, there's also another paragraph just for this point. So this is a main point. And the other ones are just details. Even though some animals do reproduce sexually, it's far less common than in plants. They mention this, but it's not a main point. It's just one fact that was mentioned. Single ramlet of a colony can survive on its own and thus is not completely dependent on the shared root system. This is also a detail because it just mentioned in one part. So that's why it's a detail. And the seeds that individuals within a clonal colony might create by asexual reproduction are not genetically identical to the parent plants. So if you see, all 6 of them are mentioned in the text, but only 3 of them are main points. So you have to be really, really careful with this one. And finally, we have the category questions. This is really similar to the previous one, but instead of asking you to summarize, they ask you to divide all the possible answers into 2 groups, usually 2 groups. There could be 3, but it's usually 2 groups. One thing I forgot to mention, the summary and the category questions are always at the end of the passage, and they count for double the points. So always take your time answering these questions. Okay, I usually do them last because once I do them last, I already have a chance to read most of the text, so I just have to complete certain things. So understand what the categories are about, find the details and relate it to the topic, and skim the text. That means give it a quick read and find out what the categories are about. So here they're going to give you 2 categories, in this case, asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, and they're going to give you options. And if you read here, they say that 2 phrases are not going to be used. So it's a good thing to identify which ones are the ones that are not relevant, because you only have 5 slots for 7 questions, for 7 options, sorry. So these ones are you usually have to drag them to each box, the same as the previous one. So I'm just going to skip to the correct answer. So asexual reproduction, special roots may aid in the process. Yes. The world's largest organism most likely was created in this way. Pando, yes. The offspring is genetically identical to its progenitor. Yes, that's a main thing. So these ones are all part of the sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, the majority of animals produce offspring this way. Yes, basically that's how all of us were created, because we're not plants. And a plant is grown from a seed. That's basically how sexual reproduction works in plants. So yes. And the ones that are not mentioned is a link between previously unconnected plants is formed. No, because this is not reproduction. This is connection. Even if it's true, it's about how 2 plants connect. It's not reproduction. And a plant cannot reproduce when removed from a group. It talks about reproduction, but it doesn't make sense within any of these 2 categories. Okay, so that was a bit of a speed run between the last 2 kinds of questions. So what I'm going to do is, while I ask for questions, I'm going to be launching the poll for today's lesson. So these are the main 10 questions that we can encounter. I'm going to send you the presentation as well, so you can download it and just check it with more time. Some of you already have it. For the ones that don't, here is the presentation. I already sent it to the chat. So if you have any questions or any doubts once you review it after the lesson, send me a text. Tell me tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to do another practice, or we're going to encounter some of these questions in like real scenarios. So yeah, basically that's it regarding the reading section. These are the 10 different options that we can find. Do you have any questions before finishing today's session? All right, so you have 2 readings, and you have well, 1 reading with questions and 1 reading without questions, the clonal colonies, and the one we did yesterday with the Navajo, the Navajo pottery. So go through them, practice them. I'm going to give you another one tomorrow that we're going to do in class. So I'm going to give you 20 minutes to read it and answer it, which is usually the time you have allocated for each reading passage in the real test. So we're going to do like a real-time simulation tomorrow. And yeah, this one is the kind of is a session that you can find more resources online. So yeah, I recommend you to practice. Practice is key with this section. Just practice, get used to skimming, just reading really fast, and just look for specific details. And always mind the context. So those are my main recommendations. Each question has basically how I tackle them. And yeah, I think when I did my TOEFL, I had only 1 mistake, probably in a summary question. I don't know, but I think I got 29 out of the 30 possible questions. So this strategy works. Just practice. Practice is the main thing. Questions before we finish?
Teacher, sorry for the question, but how much time do you practice for these reading passes?
So I did like at least 10, 15 readings, I think. I didn't have much time to prepare for my TOEFL, but because I used to read quite a lot, and my master was in research, so I was quite familiar with it. So I did like 10, 15 just to get used to the kinds of questions. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Do at least 5. I'm going to prepare some resources. I'm going to send you tomorrow or on the weekend tops. So I'm just going to prepare some resources that you can check out and practice. But there's a lot of them on the internet. Any other question? All right, cool. If we don't have any other questions, I'm just going to check the assistance today. Okay, cool. So that will be all for today. Thank you very much for your time, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you, teacher. See you
Bye,
tomorrow.
teacher. Thank you.
Bye, teacher. Thank you.